Why is it that some food companies spend literally billions of dollars on advertising? What are they really selling? Fun, refreshment, happiness. Now, food corporations have been trying to pull a fast one on us with artificial sweeteners. And the introduction of artificial sweeteners into the snack food industry has created an entirely new false narrative for their products. Healthiness. All the same flavors you love without any of the health risks, right? What these companies are not showing you is the true cost of consuming their products and their high supply of artificial sugars. That's because scientific studies on the personal and global impacts of mass-produced food products that utilize these artificial sugars could shock you into boycotting these products. So strap in for a deep dive into the real history of artificial sweeteners. Where did they come from? What do they really do to the human body? And could they actually be worse for you than real sugar? If you've loved sugary drinks but have switched to their diet or no sugar versions, you need to see what these companies are hiding from you. Because one thing is certain, their promises of good health are as artificial as their products. So let's investigate the real truth about artificial sugars, how they make you fat and addicted. Today, everywhere you look, you can find sugar. But have you noticed that something has drastically changed for all the major companies who supply us with supermarket shelf fulls of sugar? Soft drink manufacturers have discovered that they can no longer hide the truth about their high sugar products. It has been conclusively proven that sugary sodas and juice drinks are directly linked to the ever-increasing obesity and diabetes epidemics currently sweeping the globe. So for the last several decades, these companies have attempted a new marketing tactic: diet foods. In fact, unless you've been living under a rock, you will have surely noticed that the canned and bottled drink sections of your supermarket have become flooded with diet drinks, low sugar drinks, and even no sugar drinks. The reality is, while real sugar has been removed from these foods and drinks, something else has secretly been added: artificial sugar. But where did these supposedly healthier sweetness options come from exactly? As it turns out, the history of artificial sweeteners is hundreds of years old, and there have been many unlikely and shocking twists and turns to the story. The 1950s. It was a new, post-war world which promised a dazzling future. People wanted to live longer and look better doing it. Diets became all the craze, and artificial sweeteners became the future of tasteful health. But luckily enough for food corporations, artificial sweeteners were nothing new. In fact, they had been discovered decades, and in some cases, centuries earlier. So maybe we should travel just a bit further back in time, to 1878, and over to Baltimore at Johns Hopkins University, in the laboratory of Professor of Chemistry Ira Remsen, where a Russian research chemist named Konstantin Fallberg made an accidental discovery that changed the world of food forever. As the story goes, one fateful day in June, after working with a coal tar derivative, Fallberg forgot to wash his hands before coming home. Sitting down for supper, he grabbed a bread roll, not realizing that a small portion of this substance was still on his fingers. Biting into the crust, he was surprised to find that it had a pleasantly sweet taste. Konstantin excitedly ran back to Remsen's lab and found that this taste was produced when a beaker containing the substance O-sulfol benzoic acid accidentally overboiled and reacted with phosphorus chloride and ammonia. This produced the compound now known as benzoic sulfonide, aka saccharin. It was Fallberg who decided to name this compound saccharin, the Latin word for sugar. And working with Remsen, the pair synthesized the world's first commercially viable artificial sweetener. In 1879, Konstantin Fallberg and Ira Remsen co-authored an article in which they described their invention, noting that this artificial sugar tasted even sweeter than cane sugar. However, in 1886, without Remsen's knowledge or permission, Fallberg filed German and American patents on their method for producing an inexpensive sugar alternative and called it Fallberg's Saccharin. Remsen protested. But that did not stop Fallberg from manufacturing saccharin in New York City, where he and one other employee produced 5 kilograms of saccharin a day. At first, it was only offered in pill and powder form, where it was prescribed by doctors to treat headaches and nausea. Saccharin was officially unveiled as a potential commercial product at the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. This at the time futuristic fair showcased some truly amazing inventions, like the Ferris wheel, the dishwasher, Wrigley's Juice Fruit gum, and even the zipper. But this sweet sugar alternative stole the show, and it became marketed as a healthier way to sweeten food. It became especially intriguing to diabetics, who began using saccharin in their teas and coffees. Chemical companies took notice. Monsanto, the controversial agricultural biotech behemoth, actually sold saccharin as one of its first products. However, by 1906, public perception of saccharin began to shift, as muckraker Upton Sinclair's novel, titled The Jungle, exposed the hidden and ugly truth of America's burgeoning food industry. Sinclair had spent several weeks undercover at meat-packing plants in the Chicago stockyards, where he witnessed unsanitary practices and incredible health violations. He included these accounts in his instantly popular novel, which created a huge public outcry and desire for government intervention. Suddenly, people were aware of and worried about what was, at the time, quite the futuristic issue: mass-produced foods and the risk that they might be toxic. So, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, the first governmental attempt to regulate the food industry. Once saccharin got put under the microscope, scientists began to question the potential side effects of this compound. Harvey Wiley, the head of the chemical division of the U.S. Department of Agriculture and a main creator of the Pure Food and Drug Act, worried that any substance which was derived from coal tar could not possibly be safe for human consumption. Thus, Wiley recommended a total saccharin ban. However, this was not a welcome notion to President Theodore Roosevelt, who was already a fan and a regular user of saccharin. In fact, Roosevelt famously declared, "Anyone who says saccharin is injurious to health is an idiot." Roosevelt actually empowered Ira Remsen to monitor Wiley, and Remsen stated that saccharin was harmless in small doses. This ensured that there would be no governmental ban of saccharin. Disillusioned by his lack of success in enforcing the Pure Food and Drug Act, Wiley resigned from his leadership role at the Chemistry Bureau in 1912. Saccharin use in America became more widespread during World War I, as a sugar shortage helped to increase its popularity. In fact, Monsanto took advantage of the situation, marketing their product as an ingredient that could save the country millions of dollars. After the war, saccharin faded from mainstream use, and it was once again mostly purchased by a small number of consumers who were trying to lose weight or manage their diabetes. Meanwhile, in Europe, the British Saccharin Company was created in 1917 due to the difficulty and expense of importing real sugar from the West Indies. Naturally, or, well, unnaturally, World War II brought about the second saccharin fad, as there was yet another sugar shortage. After that war, saccharin was once again less popular. Still, the world's and American eating habits had made a big shift towards cheaper and quicker meals. Food corporations began mass-producing pre-sweetened products, and not just with saccharin. Other types of artificial sweeteners, made through a variety of chemical processes, began to literally flood the market. Specifically, two other main types of artificially created, non-sugar sweeteners took the nation by storm. Cyclamate, discovered in 1937 at the University of Illinois, purchased by the pharmaceutical giant DuPont, and later sold to Abbott Laboratories, was recognized as safe for public consumption by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration in 1958. It was first marketed in tablet form and geared directly towards diabetics as an alternative to typical sugar. But Abbott Laboratories took it a step further and created a liquid version of Cyclamate, which was marketed towards younger housewives for their use in health-conscious cooking. Thanks largely to a new world in which physical appearance became increasingly important to younger and seemingly healthy people, finding ways to consume less sugar without sacrificing taste was suddenly extremely important. Cyclamate took hold in the soft drink industry, and it found its way into a variety of low-calorie and diet soda and juice products, including Tab and Diet Pepsi. The brand Sweeten Low began utilizing Cyclamate in its international sweetener products, and by the late 60s, Abbott Laboratories reported that annual sales of their product had reached the $1 billion mark. By 1968, reports indicated that America was consuming 17 million pounds of Cyclamate per year. But in 1969, a new public outcry to artificial sweeteners swept the nation. A Canadian study showed that a common 10-to-1 Cyclamate Saccharin mixture increased the incidence of bladder cancer in laboratory rats. By 1977, the soft drink industry speculated that the FDA would have to ban saccharin once again. The study was so shocking to Canadians, in fact, that the makers of Canada Dry not only removed Cyclamate from their low-calorie offerings, they created a PR spectacle by bulldozing stores of their diet products in front of the national media. However, results of that animal study were considered potentially misleading, as the lab rats were fed artificial sweeteners at a rate which was equivalent to a human drinking 550 cans of diet soda per day, well over 50 times the recommended daily limit for Cyclamate. Still, that didn't stop the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare from bypassing the FDA to remove the required, generally recognized as safe designation from Cyclamate. The Canadian animal study, which suggested that saccharin and Cyclamate use could lead to bladder cancer, forced the FDA's hand, as the Delaney Amendment mandated that any product which showed signs of cancer in humans or test animals must be banned. In fact, then acting commissioner of the FDA, Dr. Sherwin Gardner, stated that while there had not been evidence of saccharin causing cancer in humans, Canadian tests show unequivocally that this substance can produce malignant bladder tumors in rats. Thus, decades after its introduction to the public, the FDA recommended a new ban on saccharin. But, of course, this wasn't the end of the story, for saccharin at least. Around this same time, a study from Albany Medical College was revealed to have found no link between saccharin and bladder cancer. The study went as far as saying that saccharin was completely harmless. These new findings, along with a show of support for artificial sweeteners from the American Diabetes Association, took the wind out of the FDA's banning sales, so to speak. And the United States Congress, not being a body to stand in the way of American corporate profits, quickly moved to overrule the FDA's recommended ban of saccharin. But Cyclamate was not so lucky. In fact, across the pond, the United Kingdom had already banned Cyclamate in the late 1960s, and in 1970, the FDA banned Cyclamate for sale in the United States. Abbott Laboratories protested, in a manner of speaking, by conducting their own tests, which, of course, showed that their product was safe for human consumption. They partnered with the Calorie Control Council, which, despite the reputable name, was actually a political lobby representing the diet foods industry. Together, they petitioned the FDA to lift the Cyclamate ban. In the mid-1980s, studies from the Cancer Assessment Committee, a department of the FDA, found that cyclamate was not carcinogenic, and the acceptable daily intake for cyclamate was set at 11 milligrams per kilogram of body weight by the World Health Organization. But surprisingly enough, the US government upheld the cyclamate ban in America, which continues to this day. By 1981, with the banning of cyclamate in the States, the US food industry was in need of a new artificial sweetener, and that's when we got aspartame. You may know it by another name. We'll get to that bit of buzzy advertising in a sec. But by now, you've probably heard that this artificial sweetener also has a sketchy past in terms of its potential health risks. So, what's the story on aspartame? Well, in an eerie coincidence, just like saccharin, aspartame was discovered by accident. In 1965, just outside Chicago, in Skokie, Illinois, where chemist James L. Schlatter was working to create an anti-ulcer medication for his employer, the pharmaceutical company G.D. Searle. Mirroring Konstantin Fallberg's discovery of saccharin, Schlatter accidentally created aspartame after mixing the amino acids phenylalanine and aspartic acid, and then tasting this mixture out of sheer curiosity. He noted, "I licked my finger and it tasted good," recalled Schlatter. Taking his concoction to the Searle executives, the company decided to file a food additive petition for aspartame in 1973. By 1974, the FDA had granted approval for Searle to produce aspartame as a dry good. This was a smart move by Searle, as the 1969 ban on cyclamate meant that the artificial sweetener market had only one current mass-produced product on offer, that being saccharin. However, Searle found that they had some tough new critics ready to wage war against aspartame. Dr. John Olney, a psychiatrist, and James Turner, co-founder of the Center for Study of Responsive Law, partnered to formally object to Searle's petition for aspartame to be marketed as a dry good. Dr. Olney conducted a series of new animal trials where he zeroed in on aspartame's effect on the brain. He was concerned that certain amino acids found in artificial sweeteners, especially aspartic acid, could potentially cause endocrine disruption, brain damage, or both, especially for adolescents. Dr. Olney and Turner's studies caused the FDA to set new hearings on aspartame, and Searle agreed to delay their rollout of their product. Around this time, Searle got into more hot water after concerns were raised over the validity of its in-house research. In fact, some animal tests conducted by Searle were revealed to have included sloppy research, and even possibly falsified data. The FDA pulled their approval for aspartame in 1975. So, for several years, regulatory agencies put aspartame back under the microscope. Former FDA official Adrian Gross, a veterinarian, even stated that Searle's own studies, despite being potentially doctored by Searle itself, established beyond a reasonable doubt that aspartame is capable of inducing brain tumors in experimental animals. It wasn't until the beginning of 1980 that the FDA convened a public board of inquiry regarding the potentially toxic effects of aspartame on brain health. The hearings did little to confirm or deny that aspartame was carcinogenic. Then FDA Commissioner Arthur Hayes Jr. found that aspartame was safe. Thus, the Food and Drug Administration granted sweeping approval for aspartame to be used in a wide variety of products as a packaged sugar substitute, and for use in instant coffees and teas, puddings, dairy products, and even as an additive in cereals. Finally, in 1981, cereal's first official aspartame sweetener packets hit store shelves. They called it NutraSweet. Maybe you've heard of it. Since then, aspartame has become the official artificial sweetener choice for other tabletop sugar substitutes, including Equal and Sugar Twin. Soda companies also got in on the aspartame game, as it found its way into a bevy of diet drink products, including Diet Coke, Sprite Zero, Diet Snapple, and even Crystal Light. Aspartame was also added to sugar-free gums, sugar-free syrups, and even sugar-free gelatin products like Jell-O. But that's not the end of the story. In fact, in 1985, Ohio Senator Howard Metzenbaum, often referred to by his political opponents as Senator No, introduced the Aspartame Safety Act of 1985. Senator Metzenbaum, a staunch antitrust and consumer protection advocate, was deeply skeptical of cereal's apparently dodgy scientific trial conclusions, and even took the American Medical Association to task for relying solely on cereal's allegedly falsified data. The Centers for Disease Control stepped in and concluded that any potential side effects of aspartame were generally mild. The Community Nutrition Institute, or CNI, joined the fight, sending a sharply worded, critical letter to then FDA Commissioner Frank Young, in which they accused the FDA of conducting no serious effort to determine the actual extent of consumer reactions to NutraSweet. And on the very same day that Senator Metzenbaum introduced his aspartame safety bill, the national organization Aspartame Victims and Their Friends Incorporated was launched. This group, which was affiliated with the Community Nutrition Institute, announced their plan to sue Searle over their manufacturing of aspartame. The Aspartame Victims Organization also created a national telephone hotline for consumers to report their negative reactions to the artificial sweetener. But despite the CNI's ongoing crusade against aspartame, lawsuits and new potential bans fizzled, and the FDA claimed that studies showing potential brain damage from aspartame use were flawed. The public went on with their low-calorie lives, and artificial sweeteners, especially aspartame, began earning eye-popping profits. In fact, by 1984, Searle was reported to have sold over $600 million worth of aspartame to the American public. The artificial sweetener industry had a new behemoth, and while Cyclamate and Saccharin became names of the past, aspartame took the crown as king of the sugar substitute future. Now, years on, with the rise of the internet, it has become increasingly difficult to separate fact from fiction when it comes to scientific findings regarding the health risks of these artificial products. Today, we are surrounded by low-calorie sugar alternatives. You can find these products at every coffee shop and in most low-sugar or low-fat packaged foods. And quote-unquote new sugar substitutes, including stevia, have ushered in a new era of artificiality in our foods. But what separates these newer artificial sweeteners from those older classics? And where exactly did this stevia come from anyways? What does the latest research really show about all your favorite sugar alternatives? And why are some doctors now warning against their use in the treatment of diabetes? We're about to answer all these questions, and we'll explore the frightful truth about artificial sweeteners and your blood sugar control in just a sec. But first, if you are finding this video informative and enlightening, we'd really appreciate your help. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to join our growing anti-diabetes community. Now, you are probably wondering, what about stevia? And what exactly separates this sugar substitute from other artificial sweeteners? We'll get to stevia in just a sec, but you may remember that before stevia, there was Splenda. This product originally relied heavily on sucralose, yet another chemical composition that was discovered by accident in 1976 at London's Queen Elizabeth College with funding from the British food corporation Tate and Lyle. Researcher Leslie Huff and his student Shashikant Phadnis were investigating new uses for sucrose and its synthetic derivatives when Huff told Phadnis to test a chlorinated sucrose sample. As the story goes, Phadnis thought he was told to taste the sample, which he did, and naturally, he found it to be artificially sweet. Tate and Lyle patented sucralose in 1976, while animal studies conducted at Duke University, which, it should be noted, was funded by the Sugar Association, a natural enemy of the artificial sweetener industry, found that sucralose had the ability to increase pH levels in the intestines and could lead to increases in body weight. However, those studies were labeled as not scientifically rigorous and deficient in several critical areas by an expert scientific panel. Still, it wasn't until 1991 that sucralose was approved for use in Canada. Australia followed suit in 1993, and then sucralose made its way to New Zealand in 1996. Finally, in 1999, sucralose became available for sale in America, where Tate and Lyle partnered with the corporate giant Johnson & Johnson to bring us Splenda. Since then, Splenda use exploded, and it quickly overtook Equal in the artificial sweetener market, bringing in a reported $212 million in US sales in 2006, compared to Equal's far less impressive $48 million haul. By 2012, the New Zealand Herald had heralded Splenda as the category leader in tabletop sweetener in the US. By 2015, Pepsi replaced aspartame with sucralose in their diet soda range, though they did switch back to aspartame in 2018. Suddenly and splendidly for Johnson & Johnson, Splenda was everywhere. Splenda's near-instant success was also, at least partially due to the fact that sucralose, unlike other sweeteners, is heat-stable, meaning you can use it in baking. This helped to secure Splenda as the new king of artificial sweetness. But are there hidden health risks, especially for diabetics, when it comes to Splenda? Stick around, because we're about to show you exactly how much sweeter Splenda and other artificial sweeteners are compared to typical table sugar, and why that can be bad news for your blood sugar control and your weight management. First, let's get back to the newest form of artificial sweetener to hit the market, stevia. So, from where and when in the world did this artificial sweetener arise? Well, first off, technically speaking, stevia is not artificial. It comes from the South American plant Stevia rebaudiana, within which lies steviol glycosides, compounds which provide this natural sweetness. And while stevia and sweeteners that use it, including Truvia and some types of Splenda, may seem fairly new, the natural sweetness of the Stevia rebaudiana was first reported all the way back in 1901 by Italian Swiss botanist Dr. Moises Bertoni, after he discovered the plant in eastern Paraguay. At least, he was the first Westerner to discover stevia. Historical records indicate that the indigenous cultures of the region had already been using the Stevia rebaudiana plant for hundreds of years. They called it ka'ahe'e, or the sweet herb, which they used as a medicine, particularly for regulating blood sugar. Bertoni, a passionate supporter of agriculture and naturalism, founded the National School of Agriculture in Paraguay's capital city, Asunción. Upon recognizing the unique chemical properties within the sweet leaf of ka'ahe'e, Bertoni commented that he was in the position to note that even in dosages much higher than necessary for sweetening, it does not have any negative effects on the body. However, It was also noted that while the plant produced an extremely sweet taste without the typical negative consequences of cane sugar, it carried a bitter aftertaste. In fact, a 1928 report published in the Washington Post stated that the less than satisfactory flavor produced by the stevia plant meant that this sugar alternative would never be commercially viable unless and until its chemical composition was altered. It wasn't until the 1970s that the Japanese artificial sweetener industry turned its attention to stevia. Just like in America and the UK, Japan became suspicious towards saccharin. By 1973, Japanese researchers were intensely studying the stevia rebaudiana as they sought means to extract its sweetness, but without its bitterness. By the 1980s, Japan's version of stevia had been introduced into a variety of national food products, including seasonings, ice creams, and soft drinks. American curiosity grew over the potential of this ancient natural sweetener, but the US government intervened, and in 1991, the FDA prohibited any importation of stevia. At the time, the FDA claimed there were safety concerns surrounding this foreign substance. But there were whispers that certain American artificial sweetener manufacturers, namely Monsanto, strong-armed the US government into keeping this potential new competitor out of their territory. So, stevia was hidden away from the American marketplace until 2009, when a new agricultural megacorporation, Cargill, petitioned the Food and Drug Administration for approval of its stevia product, Truvia. As it turned out, the FDA granted approval of this highly refined version of stevia, but not for the natural dried herb itself. Still, purified rebaudioside A became classified with the coveted, generally recognized as safe label in December of 2008, just in time for Cargill to partner with Coca-Cola for the release of Truvia. It was the world's first widely available stevia-based product, and the deal between Cargill and Coca-Cola allowed this highly publicized launch to include products like Sprite Green. But Truvia was not true stevia. It included erythritol, a sugar alcohol, and other natural flavorings. Studies have found that while erythritol and other sugar alcohols cause little to no rise in blood sugar levels, they can lead to certain gastrointestinal side effects like bloating, flatulence, and cramping. Eagle-eyed consumers took notice of the fact that Cargill touted their product as a natural sugar substitute, when, in fact, it was highly processed. Two separate class action lawsuits rocked Cargill in 2013, as litigants found that the Truvia brand had engaged in deceptive marketing practices. However, other voices in the scientific community felt that stevia was safe enough. A 2010 review noted that stevia, used as a replacement for sucrose, could directly benefit diabetics by helping them lower their caloric intake. The World Health Organization's Joint Experts Committee on Food Additives studied the long-term effects of stevia and declared that humans could safely consume up to 4 milligrams per kilogram of body weight of steviol glycoside daily. By 2013, a reported 47% of American households had purchased products containing stevia, the two biggest brands being Truvia and its main competitor, Purevia. And by 2017, more natural stevia was finally legally allowed for sale in the US. Today, while whole leaf stevia and raw stevia extracts are still yet to be approved by the FDA, you can find less refined stevia in products like stevia in the raw. Now, though stevia is considered to be a more natural artificial sweetener, it is actually far sweeter than real sugar. Want to guess how much? Is stevia twice as sweet as natural sugar? Not quite. Try 250 to 300 times sweeter. In fact, all of these artificial sweeteners are off the charts when compared to table sugar. Reports have pegged saccharin's sweetness at anywhere from 200 to 700 times sweeter than normal sugar. Aspartame was also found to be 200 times sweeter than sucrose. Even cyclamate was about 30 to 50 times sweeter than sugar. Why is this ridiculous sweetness potentially dangerous for your weight management and your blood sugar control? Well, scientists note that you can run the risk of rewiring your taste buds if you overconsume artificial sweeteners. What does this mean? To put it bluntly, once your brain gets used to this extra sweetness, eating natural sugar foods like whole fruits may no longer satisfy your sugar cravings, and that can lead to overeating other sugar-heavy sweet treats. But for diabetics, there may be one especially damaging side effect of consuming artificial sugar. The Journal of Family Medicine and Primary Care found that consuming artificial sweeteners can essentially trick your brain into thinking you are eating sugar, which can have the effect of an unnecessary insulin release from your pancreas. After all, that insulin will have no actual sugar to attach to and shepherd to your muscle cells, and that means that artificial sweeteners may unintentionally create the effect of excess insulin in your bloodstream. In turn, it may eventually lead to decreased insulin receptor activity, otherwise known as insulin resistance. In fact, several studies have suggested that those who consume higher levels of artificial sweetening agents experience higher levels of insulin resistance compared with those who consume little or no artificial sugar. One study from the European Journal of Endocrinology even found a link between artificially sweetened drinks and LADA, or latent autoimmune diabetes of adults. This is similar to type 1 diabetes, though, as its name denotes, it presents much later in life than most type 1 diagnoses. At the same time, scientists note that results are mixed and more tests are needed. So, what is the truth about artificial sweeteners, their potential health risks, and your blood sugar, and which type of sweetener may be best for you? Well, in general, a recent meta-analysis of over 50 studies found that artificial sweeteners used in beverages can lower your caloric intake, but they can also increase your risk of hypertension or high blood pressure. And according to the Mayo Clinic, they have been found to heighten your risk of cardiovascular disease. Certain studies found that it is possible to form an addiction to artificial sweeteners, which may create heightened sugar cravings. A study from the medical journal Current Gastroenterology reports, titled The Paradox of Artificial Sweeteners in Managing Obesity, noted that depending on an individual's personal diet and eating habits, becoming addicted to artificial sweeteners could potentially lead to weight gain. Still, Harvard Medical School notes that if you use artificial sweeteners in replacement of true sugar, especially when it comes to soft drinks, that can work to reduce your risk of obesity, liver cancer, heart disease, and yes, type 2 diabetes. Animal studies on individual glycosides within stevia have found that this sweetener may help to increase insulin sensitivity and pancreatic beta cell function. Animal trials also found that stevia glycosides decreased blood pressure and reduced the formation of arterial plaque in hypertensive rats. At the same time, multiple studies have indicated that how artificial sweeteners affect your body largely depends on your weight. A 2016 Brazilian trial found that participants with normal weight who began consuming artificially sweetened beverages experienced increases in their risk for developing diabetes. This study further showed that newly diagnosed type 2 diabetics with normal weight who began consuming more artificially sweetened drinks displayed higher fasting glucose levels and worsened beta cell function. However, this research also revealed that overweight and obese individuals who switch from high sugar drinks to artificially sweetened drinks typically do not increase their risk of developing diabetes. But at the end of the day, most all doctors and nutritionists agree on one simple notion. The healthiest option is to simply cut all added sweetness out of your life. And studies show that cutting table sugar and artificial sugars from your diet can work to rewire your brain within a matter of days. In fact, a 2014 study conducted by Kaiser Permanente showed that 95% of participants who completely removed all added sugar and artificial sweeteners from their diet for 2 weeks reported that sweet foods and drinks suddenly tasted sweeter, or even too sweet. 75% of those surveyed even said that naturally sweet foods, like carrots and apples, suddenly seemed sweeter to their taste buds. And about 85% of study participants said that they stopped craving sugar after only 6 days. The study further found that about 35% of participants reported that they had lost weight, and nearly every participant claimed that they were ready to use far less added sugar, or even no added sugar, in their diets. So, while artificially sweet foods have been shown to increase your cravings for sugar-filled foods, cutting out artificial sweeteners can have the effect of killing your sweet tooth hunger and potentially help you to lose weight. But what is the latest advice from governmental health authorities? Well, in July of 2023, the World Health Organization made a shocking announcement. The WHO's Cancer Research Agency classified aspartame as a possible carcinogen. They concluded that aspartame can potentially cause liver cancer, and it may lead to other serious health issues when consumed in extremely high amounts. The World Health Organization actually categorizes cancerous substances into 4 categories, and they have placed aspartame into the possibly carcinogenic to humans category, below the more dangerous tiers, where both alcohol and tobacco are currently listed. The WHO notes that their research showed humans could safely consume aspartame at up to 40 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day. They now recommend that an average weight adult consume no more than, wait for it, 14 cans of aspartame sweetened soda per day, or about 74 packets of sweeteners with aspartame. So yeah, you probably don't have to worry about going over the WHO's recommended limit. Still, new studies continue to suggest that every type of artificial sweetener may potentially pose some health risk. A recent study published in the journal Nature Medicine even found that erythritol, that common sugar alcohol used in some sweetener brands, may increase the risk of stroke. In fact, participants with the highest amounts of erythritol in their blood were found to have twice the chances of stroke, blood clots, and death compared to participants with the lowest levels of this sweetener in their blood. In the end, most of the recent studies on artificial sweeteners have determined that while they pose some risk of various negative reactions, there has not been conclusive evidence showing that artificial sugar is acutely dangerous. Still, many scientists, like molecular biologist Marion Nestle, contend that this isn't enough to exonerate artificial sweeteners. But what is the World Health Organization's final, or at least most recent word on artificial sweeteners? Director of the Department of Nutrition and Food Safety for the World Health Organization, Francesco Branca, declared, "Our results do not indicate that occasional consumption should pose a risk to most consumers." However, he went on to say, the risk may be there if you're approaching the limit, so why take the risk? Indeed, scientists, nutritionists, and the World Health Organization will all tell you that it is still decidedly not healthy to consume 14 cans of diet soda, or any soda, per day. And they all stress one simple, golden word: moderation. In an article published by USA Today, nutritionist Jill Weisenberger stated as much, as she declared that the dose makes the poison. She noted that each major type of artificial sweetener is distinctive in its chemical structure, and each will behave differently inside your body. Weissenberger went on to say that adverse effects always come up with a dose amount. So anybody who's concerned about the safety of it could sometimes use stevia, sometimes use sucralose, and sometimes use monk fruit. Therefore, the type and amount of artificial sweetener you can safely use will be unique to you, and it will be up to you to discover which artificial sweetener and how much or little of that sweetener is right for you. So, now you know the long and winding road of artificial sweetness. As it turns out, regularly consuming any type of added sweetening agent is really not super helpful for your blood sugar or your overall health. But if you have been a regular consumer of sucrose and products with added sugar, especially those glucose spiking soft drinks, moving to lower calorie artificial sweeteners can help you to reduce your risk of high blood sugar levels and obesity. But just saying no to any form of added sugar, even these artificial sweeteners, is the best choice you can make for your blood sugar balance, your heart health, and your body in general.